I showed her the announcer from last week's program, so that's why she came. She's totally surprised by this. Accessibility on websites. How does an attorney get involved with a website anything? The last thing you want me to do is to come even close to programming your computer. But the way I got involved is the way I get involved in a lot of things. My client gets in trouble. This is a demand letter from Carlson Lynch. It's a Pittsburgh law firm. And what they have done is targeted industries. In this case, it was a utility that I represent. And they received this letter. It starts out this way. We represent disabled individuals throughout the United States who use the internet to facilitate their access to goods and services. Well, okay. The United States Department of Justice and various federal courts have concluded that businesses which offer goods and services to the public through websites are public accommodations that must comply with the general accessibility mandate of the Americans with Disabilities Act. When you get to read that sentence, it is kind of like leaving the Rotary Club meeting today, going back to your office and seeing the television crew from 60 Minutes waiting for you at your door. So you know that your afternoon has just been shot. And then what they do is they go on to say, our investigation reveals that your website has substantial access barriers. As a consequence of these failures, it is difficult or impossible for our clients and similarly situated stakeholders to access the site's information and legal terms and conditions. And I'm thinking, accessibility on a website, what do you do? How do you make a website? Do you build a ramp? I mean, you got to put the bumpy things at the bottom? So, what does this mean? Ah, says the letter very helpfully. Before you incur significant cost by engaging outside experts of your own, we invite you to first contact us directly to explore a far more cost-effective and pragmatic approach to resolving these issues. Who do they think would be dumb enough to do? Mark, we found them. They're the people who didn't have anything else to do this afternoon except come to hear this talk. But before you contact the law firm, make sure first that you reply to that email from the Middle Eastern prince, you know, the one with the large inheritance, and all he needs is your bank account information, because the money's all going to go to the same place. So, okay. But that leads to the question, is there a legal issue? The Department of Justice says there is. And they use the Americans with Disabilities Act as the basis for their authority for saying that there isn't a legal issue. How do we get there? Well, first of all, you need to know that there are three parts to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Part one protects against discrimination in employment based on disability. Title II protects against discrimination in accessing public services through things like municipal governments or school districts or state governments or county, those types of services. And Part 3 prohibits discrimination based on disability for access to public accommodations. Okay, so there you have the background. Let's look at Title III. What it says is that if you're operating a public accommodation that discriminates against a person with disabilities, you discriminate if they don't have full and equal enjoyment of whatever services or products are offered on the website. And they say that you discriminate if you fail to provide auxiliary services or aids that are technology that allow persons with disabilities to have access. So now we're starting to look at some of these ADA Title III requirements. It's a public accommodation standard, and we're going to get back to that in a minute because it's important for one reason. So then the next question is a website a place of public accommodation? Well, how many of you have a website where you offer information about products that your company has or services that you provide? Don't raise your hand, you'll incriminate yourself. How many of you have ever put on a website an information about an opening or a career position at your company? Don't raise your hand, you'll incriminate yourself. That's what makes a website a public accommodation. That's why the talk today. That's why it's important to know. This trolling law firm goes to websites and by industry. I think now the target industry that I've heard about is the credit unions. But they're targeting these industries and looking to see whether the products and services can be accessed by persons with disabilities. So what do? Well, don't panic. Yes, you have an obligation to make your website accessible, but it's not something that you have to call a lawyer to do. It's not something that you have to engage a special expert to do. It is something that you can do basically through the normal website maintenance that you engage in, and that's the reason for the talk. Now that you have the background and you know why you need to do it, I'm going to turn the program over to Park Weicker, and he is going to show us the technology and demonstrate it for you. In order to do that, he has to change the programs. So while he's doing that, I just want to tell you this. Park is here today, and he does not do this work, and he's getting nothing out of this. But he has served with me in court cases as an expert witness on computer issues, and so as a result of that, he's graciously agreed to lend his time to us so that he can demonstrate the technology for you and show you how easy and how inexpensively you can get it. The reason is this: because you can put this in as part of regular website updates at little additional cost to your firms, to your companies. And then when they do the survey of your website, you won't get tagged by their testing. And that's why I'm here, because I want you to avoid getting one of these letters. If you do get a letter, I want you to know it's a relatively easy response and you don't need to panic. That's why we're here. So Park, if you can take it away.
Yeah. Let's see if it came on. Okay, I'm going to be moving around a little bit, so I'm going to use a little different microphone. I'm Park Weicker, as you can see. I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about the WCAG 2.0, which is included into the ADA rule set by reference. So that means that everything inside of the web content accessibility guidelines is also part of the law. I've been consulting for a number of years and helping people through various technology issues. And I just want to tell you a little story. Many years ago, I had a job position open for a service technician. And I heard some ruckus in my office, and I came out, and there was a gentleman, his name was Kevin. And he was there at the front desk, and he waves to me. Come here, you know. And so I went over to him, and he had a tablet in his hand and a pencil. And this is the tablet made out of paper, in case you don't know which kind of tablet I'm talking about. And he was a deaf man, and he was writing on this tablet, "I'm here to apply for the job that you have open in your firm for a service technician." And I was taken back a little bit, and it took a little while to communicate with him, so because he was deaf and he also couldn't speak. So I was writing back and forth to him on this tablet, and I realized He had none of the qualifications that I needed. He'd never done any service work. So I sent him away that day. I did have his resume. 3 days later, Kevin comes back, and he comes into the room, and it gets my attention. I come out, and he has brochures in his hands. And he says to me, which one of these schools do I need to go to in order to work for you? And that was then. And today, people don't apply for work or apply for jobs by just showing up at your door. I don't know when the last time that was that somebody knocked on your door and said, hey, can I talk to you about that job opening? No, they go to ZipRecruiter, they go to your website, and that's what we're going to talk about here. How do people with needs use your website? What technology do they use? Actually, the technology is very old, and when computers started becoming fairly prolific in the early 90s, this was one of the first technologies that was available. So Braille displays for your blind people it would take a line of text on the screen, and it puts it into a movable type Braille display, and you could read it from the Braille, of course, if you read Braille. Magnifier apps, many of you have probably seen these, where it expands a section of the screen. It's for people with low vision or limited vision. Screen readers, which I'm going to demonstrate to you today, which take anything that's on the screen and turn it into an audible response. So you'll see here, I'm picking on Gladfelter, and I'm not trying to point anything out, so if you're from Gladfelter, don't be offended. But this is pretty typical for somebody's website. And we're talking about a careers section. One of the things that you need to keep in mind is when you I'm going to just kind of talk through one of the areas of the WCAG which would apply to this type of a page. You have to start your forms out with instructions. Be instructive. Help the people know what it is they're filling the form out for, or what they're filling it out for, or what their next steps are supposed to be. In this case, it says, please complete the form below and attach your resume. It's sufficient. Maybe it could be better. And then what follows is an orderly form so that people can go ahead and fill that out. So I'm going to show you a demonstration with a screen reader.
Speech mode beeps. Speech mode talk.
Sorry about that.
Advanced threat protect. Press http://www.
Okay, so this screen reader, what it does is for someone with low vision, would read this audibly to someone, and I'm just going to kind of go through what it does for people.
Heading level 1 adaptability.
So when you go to a web page, you hear what it's saying. It's saying heading level 1 adaptability. It's not only reading the title to you, but it's also telling you about the hierarchy of the document.
Heading level 2 information and relationships.
So it tells you the next level of hierarchy, and this is why it's important to sectionalize your website or your web page so that the information is in a hierarchical format.
Please complete the following form to enroll into our mailing list. You will newsletters both in email and postal mail after completing this form.
Okay, so it reads the instruction. I put an instruction at the beginning to make sure that people would know exactly what to do and what the result would be from doing this. So even though they came from a page that probably already said this, it's good to reiterate it. Please complete the following form, and you will now be enrolled in our newsletter. So that's great. I have a form that follows this.
Name. Edit first name and last name. Blank.
Okay, so it has told me that my first field is labeled name. It is an edit field. It gave me the secondary description, first name and last name. I put that in there just to show you how you can put additional instructions per field. And then it also told me that the field was blank.
Email. Required edit. Blank.
Email edit. Email required edit. A required edit field is a little bit different than a regular edit field because, of course, it's required. You'll notice that I also put the word required up there in a different color. Part of the WCAG says that you don't identify things that require attention with only color, which is why you see emphasis on the word. You may not be able to see it from where you are, but there is emphasis on the word.
City edit. Blank.
Now you'll notice here, for those of us who can see, city, state, and zip code is listed across that line, and we can visually see or align the fields with the labels. And that's pretty easy for us to understand. If you were blind though, and you came to that line, it would say city, state, zip. And then you go to the next line, it would say edit field. Well, do you know which edit field that is? You need to connect the labels with the appropriate fields, regardless how it's set up visually.
State edit. Blank. Zip code edit. Blank.
Now you'll notice that I'm also using different kind of highlight. It's not color only. I'm using black, but it's thicker so that you can tell where the focus is on the form. If I press enter on a form, does anybody know what's supposed to happen whenever you're on a form and you press enter?
Submit.
It's supposed to submit. You'll be surprised if you go to websites how many of them
Form
don't.
incomplete. Please enter an email address. Submit form button.
Okay, now, it came up with an error because there's no email address. You need to give people instruction, tell them what's wrong. Tell them that there's a problem and tell them exactly what's wrong so that they know what to change. In this case, it requires an email address.
Notes for postal delivery of zip code edit, state edit, city edit, email, required edit.
Okay, so this is how someone with vision problems would have used this. They would just reverse back up the form to find the faulty field.
Whisker.
Oh, I spelled it wrong.
Whisker@Wiker.net. Form sent successfully.
And then tell
Submit
them,
form button.
now he'll talk forever. So
Speech mode off.
tell them when they've been successful as well. People need to know that. And this is just part of why we want to follow the WCAG. So what it comes down to is you need to make your website perceivable. These are the three basic things. I'm going to give you one sentence descriptions of each of these words. Perceivable. Essentially, that means you need to be able to view this with multiple senses. It ends up being everything needs a text equivalent. So everything on your website that is visual, whether it's those little glyph icons that are really cute and they have a little house on them, but if you're not putting text behind that, someone that is not able to see the screen does not know what it means. So everything gets a text equivalent. Because these accessibility tools read the text, they don't read the pictures. Operable. A mouse is a device made for people who can see. It's also a device made for people with hands. So there's two groups that you're not using if your website is only accessible with a mouse. So operable essentially means you need to be able to navigate your website on the keyboard. When you get back to the office, go to any website that you normally go to and try just using the keyboard. And then you'll start to see some of the challenges that people run into. And understandable. Give good directions, instructions, make things follow in a nice, orderly format. Trying not to confuse people because, again, many people can't see the screen properly. So you need to make sure that the back end is actually in a good format and follows. So Kevin was standing in my office with these brochures and asking about which school he should go to. And I hired him on the spot. I'd never had anybody who wanted to work with me that much. You can see why, right? But he had the motivation, and what I ended up doing was actually training him. He He ended up being the best technician I ever had. He went on to be director of technology out at Kentucky School for the Deaf, and now he's doing he graduated to social work of some sort that, of course, fits his personality a little bit better. Don't exclude these people. We want to make sure that while there is the legal requirement and there's all the scary things that come with that, we could be potentially missing out on some really great people by not giving them the ability to get in and apply for work with us. I'm pretty good on time. Then I will go into next steps. Most of you here probably are not responsible for your websites. There are a whole lot of rules. The W3C actually supervises the WCAG and the rules that go into that. So what you can do is if you go back to your office and find the person who is responsible for your website, you can email their address to me, and I will just forward them a set of links that gets them at least so that they can read about what's required. Again, this is not, you do not have to use the people that the lawyers say you need to use. It doesn't take a specialist. It just takes some education to the people that already take care of your website. It's not that difficult. They may not be aware of it, but once we make them aware, they can solve your problem. And you can get an audit. There are firms out there that do audits of your website. If you're not sure where to start, it's a great way to have somebody come in and audit your website. Keep in mind, there are a lot of charlatans out there. They offer you certifications and this and that. Don't go down that road. You need an audit that should probably cost you at most, depending on your website, something like Amazon.com is probably going to be 20 grand. Something that is more normal for websites of people that have businesses of our size should be $5,000 and less for sure. I would expect a bulk of you would be in the $2,000 area to get a full-on review done by a decent corporation. Get quotes, make sure that they're in the ballpark. All you really need is the information so that you can forward that information onto your already existing programmers. They can go ahead and take care of that for you and make it compliant. That's the end of my talk, and I thought maybe we could see if there are any questions.
Before we take questions, I just want to give you a couple of comments, things that I've learned through I'm part of a national association that handles these types of technology issues. And I've learned two things that I think are significant for you as business people and nonprofits. The first is that 20% of the cost cures 80% of the accessibility issues on your website. So hit the big stuff first, okay? Don't worry about getting to every little thing necessarily, but at least get started with your technology people. See what they already know and have them implement that. You may be seeing that, for example, more and more videos have the transcription, yes, right below there. That's one example of things that we're seeing as an example of some of these adaptations. So just get started somewhere. Don't be intimidated by this. The second thing is that what you're really doing is making the website machine readable. By making it machine readable, you also make it more discoverable. For example, through search engines like Google. And that can increase traffic to your website. So some potential business benefits from what I think will likely be for most of you a very small investment in the website if you just have this talk with whoever it is responsible for updating your website. Okay, so now let's take some questions. Dan.
A couple questions. First of all, your comment about if you can't use a mouse, use the keyboard. If you can't use a mouse because of hand, how do you use the keyboard? It's sort of maybe. But the second follow-up is that most of these programs, does the person using the website have to have software on their own computer, like something they can speak into that puts the words on there? Is that a requirement? So does the software at the website download that they can use, or is that person supposed to have their own?
Okay, so there were two questions. The first was, how does someone that doesn't have a hand, how do they use the keyboard if they can't use the mouse? I don't know if you've ever seen someone with a head stick. It's basically an apparatus they put on their head and they
Okay.
hack away at the keyboard.
Thank you.
And that's why it needs to be keyboard accessible. The keyboard interface allows all of that type of equipment to go ahead and interface with the computer as well, not just with a keyboard. So it's a keyboard style interface.
And the website puts that on there for them?
No, okay, so they have a responsibility as well.
Okay.
You're not required to supply them with the equipment
Okay.
or the software. The screen reader's free. That's the one that I'm showing here, NVDA. And most of those people do fall under a state program and get some of that accessibility equipment as part of their going to school.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
About the speech?
Uh,
Having speech, in other words, the person has to speak onto the computer to put his first name, last name, and address?
Those that have to speak, they have converters on their own computers. Your website doesn't do the conversion. What you have to have is, and this is where the WCAG will get into, you are not responsible to do their part,
That's what.
but you are responsible to make it compatible with the equipment they use.
Good, thank you.
Okay?
And I'll continue that. You're suggesting that the applicant has to have their own voice recognition program, not the website. The website does not have to have its own integrated voice recognition into receiving that information through the microphone.
So the question is, and then I'm going to just rephrase that, just trying to clarify that the website is not required to have some sort of speech conversion to text kind of functionality. No. The extent of where you're required is to allow text to be put in, and that's where the client or the person using it will have to have something to be able to send a text to your website properly. So you do not have to, it doesn't go to the extent that you have to do all of that for them. They're expected to be able to at least send text to your site and work the website.
It's kind of the background coding, in other words, so that when someone with the software accesses the website, that software will pick up the code that you put in the website and do the reading. It's not that anybody can just go on the website and tab through your website and get the voice prompts. So just so we're clear, that's something that's why we had to switch to his software on his computer. That's why we're using his computer today, because it has that special accessibility software on it so that he can read the website. And that's how we put this together today.
Yes, sir.
Entrepreneurs and sole practitioners often will build a website using a GoDaddy or a company like that that allows for relatively simplistic websites to be set up. Are those companies making their offerings compliant with the ADA?
Okay, so I don't know if everybody heard the question. Basically, if you're using one of these services like Squarespace or I forget the names of them, GoDaddy, that type of thing, where they create your website for you, for the most part. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about responsibility. Who's responsible for what on your website as far as it being accessible? GoDaddy, Squarespace, those types of places are responsible for making the platform accessible. You're responsible for actually using the platform in such a way that it is accessible. If you write your own website, you're the author of the site. If you're the author of the site, you hold the copyright. That means that you are totally responsible. If you are using something like Squarespace, you're responsible for how you used it and whether or not you implemented their controls in order to make it accessible. So you may have to read up on how to use their tool properly, but most of those sites are pretty good at making them accessible. So the platforms, WordPress is a popular platform. WordPress actually has most of these accessibility things covered, but you do have to use it properly. So there is some reading, there may be some research necessary. Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
If you embed a YouTube video link in your website and it has Audible within the YouTube where somebody is obviously lecturing or speaking, do you have to convert the lecturing into YouTube?
Technically, yes. If you display it on your website, you're required to give a text equivalent for the audio that is in the video.
The question was, if you
Oh,
embed
sorry.
a YouTube video into your website, do you have to make that accessible? And the answer is yes.
Yes. Now, there are a couple ways to handle that. One is YouTube has a transcription service that will put the text on, inside the video. It's only okay. I mean, if you actually want it to work, you probably want to transcribe it yourself. Put the text in your website. The really nice thing about that is SEO. All the text now is somewhere hidden, potentially hidden, or you can press a button that says, show the transcript of this video. But the transcript should also include anything that's visual in the video that is important. So, person getting into their car. And then you actually convert the audio, somebody speaking, into text as well. So it's helpful to explain the scene in addition to just the verbal spoken word.
When I walked in here today, I thought disability for a website meant not being able to see. Apparently, there are a lot of disabilities that need to be accommodated. Can you give us a list? Can you give us, what's the gene pool out there?
I can give you, okay, so the question was, the disability, of course, of no vision is easy. It's the first thing we go to when we think about disabilities on websites. What are the other disabilities that are issues? A lot of the issues are actually focused around cognitive problems where people get confused about the flow of text and the flow of areas on your screen. So for example, if you go to Amazon.com and you closed your eyes and you had a computer just read the screen to you, you would be confused beyond all recognition. You would not know what way was up. But they have sectionalized their websites so that you can quickly navigate to the content section. Because visually, we avoid all the ads and we go right to the content, which is the picture or of the object that we're interested in. So cognitive is one of them. There are certainly physical ailments that would allow a person not to have, quadriplegics, things like that, where they don't have motion, they can't actually utilize a mouse and that type of thing. Vision. I had a deaf person who worked with me as well. And color blindness, low vision, and some partial, you wouldn't call them handicapped people or anything like that, but they may have limitations. As you get older, you can't see as well, that type of thing.
But the good news is you don't need to worry about that. The reason is that the WCAG has come up with the standards. So if you implement those standards, by implementing them, you have addressed the various disabilities. So focus on the standards, get your website designer or updater to be aware of your request to comply with the standards, and then comply with the standards. And that solves your problem. Rather than trying to imagine a parade of different disabilities that have to be accommodated, instead focus on the standards. That's your solution. I think we'll have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. And any other questions? Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned Braille display. I'm unclear what a Braille display is.
The question is, what is a Braille display? A Braille display is a robotic type of type device which has a series of holes along the length of it, and it pushes little pins up through the holes and makes Braille characters, and they can run their hand along it and feel.
So they have the device, and your website has to be able to produce input to that device.
Braille displays read text. So if you have a photograph, you need a text equivalent so that they know what the photograph is of.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate it. I hope this has been helpful for you folks.
In honor of our program today, Walt and Park were asked to autograph a book plate, and it's being placed inside The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. And we are donating this today to the York County Literacy Council's Family Literacy Program, and Bobby will accept it from our speakers. All right, next week's meeting, we will be back at the Country Club of York, and our speaker will be George Nahalville, President and CEO of Members First Federal Credit Union. And today, to close the meeting, I want to read to you a Making a Difference education quote from a local educator at York Suburban School District. And this high school English teacher shares with us her reason for why she likes to do what she does. And she says, "This morning, I was helping students find and cite sources for their research papers. A student came to me with a book in her hand and a grimace on her face. She was on the verge of tears. I said, panic isn't worth much in terms of productivity. Take a minute and breathe. And then I'm going to help you cite the source." She took her minute, and then we tackled the issue. At the end, she said, "That's it, but that's easy." I smiled and said, "Hey, I come to work every day just to blow your mind, girl." So what inspires me? Moments like this with students who are learning the size of their own minds. So on that note, thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
Have a good rest of the day.